Keanu Reeves stops mid-stride, frozen by what he sees across the busy street. A small figure huddled against a storefront, thin arms extended with a paper cup. Their eyes meet, the child's hollow with hunger, Keanu's widening with shock. For days, Keanu had walked this same route, somehow never noticing the boy until now. Something about the child's determined dignity despite desperate circumstances makes Keanu's throat tighten. What he discovers when he follows this boy will shatter everything he thought he knew about survival and change multiple lives forever, including his own. Despite his international fame and fortune, Keanu Reeves lived a life that would surprise most of his fans. Each morning began the same way, waking up in his modest apartment, making a simple breakfast, and preparing for a day that rarely resembled the Hollywood glamour associated with his name. Keanu had always been uncomfortable with the trappings of celebrity, preferring instead to ground himself in routines that connected him to ordinary people and everyday experiences. His favorite ritual came each afternoon around 4 o'clock. Keanu would leave whatever work occupied his day, script readings, meetings with directors, or training sessions for upcoming roles, and embark on a long walk through downtown Los Angeles. He dressed simply, worn jeans, comfortable shoes, and often a plain dark jacket that helped him blend into the crowd. Most days, people walked right past him, their eyes fixed on phone screens or lost in private thoughts, never realizing a world-famous actor shared their sidewalk. Keanu preferred it this way. These walks provided a bridge between his unusual career and the real world that existed beyond film sets and red carpets. He followed the same route almost daily, down through the bustling commercial district, past corner cafes filled with afternoon crowds, alongside the small park where street musicians played, and eventually to quieter neighborhoods where the city's pulse settled into a gentler rhythm. Along his route, Keanu observed the patterns of daily life. The businesswoman who walked her elderly dog at precisely 4:30 each day. The flower vendor who sang softly while arranging his blooms. The group of teenagers who practiced skateboard tricks near the community center. Over months, these strangers had become familiar characters in Keanu's life, though none knew how carefully he noticed them. He made small, unmemorable interactions part of his routine, buying a newspaper from the same corner stand, nodding hello to the security guard outside the bank, occasionally dropping a few dollars into the guitar case of a street performer. These brief connections kept him tethered to a normal existence that Hollywood success threatened to pull away from him. Friends and colleagues often asked why he bothered with these walks when he could easily hire drivers or use private entrances. "Because this is where life happens," he would say with a small shrug. To Keanu, these streets contained more authenticity than any movie set. Here, among the anonymous crowds, he found perspective that kept him humble and observant. But on this particular Tuesday, his familiar route would reveal something he had somehow missed during countless previous walks. Today, he would see someone who had been invisible to him before, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Keanu noticed the boy on the corner of 7th and Grand, a location he had passed hundreds of times before. Something seemed different today, perhaps the angle of the afternoon sun highlighting what had previously been masked in shadow, or maybe the unusual stillness of the normally bustling intersection. Whatever the reason, Keanu's eyes were suddenly drawn to the small figure pressed against the brick wall of an old department store. The child couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. His clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, jeans worn through at the knees, a faded t-shirt several sizes too large, and a hooded sweatshirt with frayed cuffs pulled down over small hands despite the warm day. Next to him sat a paper cup with a few scattered coins visible inside. Unlike the aggressive panhandlers who sometimes shouted for attention, this boy remained silent, eyes downcast, almost trying to make himself invisible while paradoxically needing to be seen. Keanu slowed his pace, observing from a distance. The boy didn't call out to passing pedestrians or wave his cup. He simply waited, occasionally making brief eye contact with strangers who mostly quickened their steps to avoid his gaze. Something about the child's demeanor struck Keanu, a strange mixture of desperation and dignity, as if he had accepted his circumstances but hadn't surrendered his humanity. For 20 minutes, Keanu watched from across the street, pretending to examine items in a shop window. He observed as countless people walked past, some dropping coins without stopping, others crossing to the opposite sidewalk to avoid the encounter entirely. The boy thanked everyone who contributed, his voice barely audible above the traffic noise. Occasionally, he would glance anxiously down the street, as if watching for someone. What troubled Keanu most wasn't just the child's obvious hunger, evident in his hollow cheeks and the way he stared longingly at a nearby food cart. but the fact that no one seemed concerned about a young boy alone on a city street corner. In a city where bizarre sights were commonplace, perhaps a child beggar had become just another part of the urban landscape, something to walk past quickly rather than truly see. A well-dressed woman paused briefly, handing the boy what appeared to be half a sandwich. Keanu watched as the child carefully wrapped most of it in the paper napkin and tucked it into his backpack, taking only a small bite before resuming his position. This calculated rationing, this careful preservation of resources, wasn't the behavior of a child thinking only of himself. As evening approached, the boy collected his cup, counted the meager earnings with practiced fingers, and slipped the money into his pocket. He hoisted a worn backpack onto his shoulders, noticeably heavy for his small frame, and began walking north, away from the more affluent downtown area. Something in Keanu's chest tightened. Without fully understanding why, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. Keanu hesitated only briefly before deciding to follow. This wasn't a role or a script. This was real life unfolding before him. And while he had no plan beyond simply understanding what he was witnessing, something told him this accidental encounter mattered in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Keeping a careful distance, Keanu followed as the boy navigated the city streets with practiced familiarity. The child moved with purpose, clearly following a route he had traveled many times before. Every few blocks, he would stop and check his surroundings, not with the casual curiosity of a child exploring, but with the cautious vigilance of someone who had learned early that the world contained dangers. The urban landscape gradually transformed around them. The gleaming high-rises and boutique storefronts gave way to discount stores with barred windows. Upscale cafes were replaced by liquor stores and check-cashing outlets. The sidewalks, pristine in the financial district, became cracked and littered with remnants of urban decay. Even the energy of the streets changed. Fewer business professionals rushing to meetings, more people lingering without apparent purpose. As they traveled deeper into one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods, Keanu maintained his distance, careful not to alarm the child. At one point, the boy turned down an alley, and Keanu quickened his pace, worried about losing sight of him. When he reached the corner, he peered cautiously around the building to see the child kneeling beside an elderly homeless man slumped against a dumpster. What happened next caught Keanu off guard. The boy reached into his backpack and removed the sandwich he had been given earlier. He unwrapped it carefully and offered the larger portion to the old man, who accepted it with trembling hands. They spoke briefly, the man placing a weathered hand on the boy's shoulder in what appeared to be gratitude or perhaps blessing. The child nodded solemnly before continuing his journey, leaving behind most of what might have been his only meal. Keanu felt something twist inside his chest, a complicated emotion he couldn't immediately name. The scene he had just witnessed revealed a compassion that existed in stark contrast to the indifference of the wealthier neighborhoods they had left behind. Here was a child with nothing, giving away what little he had. The boy's path took them further from main streets, winding through residential areas where apartment buildings stood in various states of disrepair. Faded laundry hung from balconies. Groups of young men gathered on corners, watching suspiciously as strangers passed. The boy navigated these territories with the confidence of belonging, occasionally exchanging nods with local residents who seemed to recognize him. After nearly 45 minutes of walking, the child approached a dilapidated 4-story apartment building. Paint peeled from its exterior like skin from a sunburn. Several windows were boarded up, others covered with plastic sheeting instead of glass. A sign declaring, "Condemned by order of the City of Los Angeles," hung crookedly on the front entrance, partially torn away and faded by weather. Instead of entering through the front, the boy circled to the back of the building, glancing around quickly before slipping through a gap in a chain-link fence. Keanu hesitated, then followed, staying far enough behind to remain unnoticed but close enough not to lose sight of the child in the growing darkness. The boy approached a rear door hanging partially off its hinges. Before entering, he paused to listen intently, then knocked in what appeared to be a pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. After a moment, the door opened slightly, and the boy slipped inside. Keanu stood in the shadows of the abandoned building's courtyard, processing what he had witnessed. The fading daylight cast long shadows across cracked concrete where weeds pushed through with stubborn persistence. A city pigeon landed nearby, pecking at nothing before taking flight again. In the distance, sirens wailed, a constant urban soundtrack. This condemned building wasn't just a temporary shelter. The practiced routine, the coded knock, this was home. Keanu moved closer to the building, guided by a faint light visible through a window on the ground floor. Crouching beside a pile of discarded furniture, he found an angle that allowed him to see inside without being detected. What he witnessed stopped his breath. The room inside had been transformed from abandoned space into a makeshift home. Cardboard boxes lined the walls for insulation against drafts. A collection of salvaged furniture, a stained mattress, 2 folding chairs, a table made from a wooden cable spool, had been arranged with careful intention. Battery-powered lanterns provided a warm glow that softened the harshness of the surroundings. Inside, the boy was greeted by 2 smaller children, a girl who appeared to be around 7 and a boy perhaps 5 years old. They rushed to him with the enthusiasm of those who had been waiting anxiously, small arms wrapping around his waist. The older boy set down his backpack and knelt to their level, speaking to them with a seriousness that seemed beyond his years. With methodical care, he unpacked his day's earnings. From his pockets came the handful of coins and few dollar bills he had collected. From the backpack emerged half the sandwich from earlier, now carefully divided into 2 equal portions for the younger children. A partially bruised apple, a bottle of water, a package of crackers someone had given him. Each item was catalogued and distributed with precision that spoke of long practice. The young boy didn't take any food for himself. Keanu watched as the older boy helped the younger ones wash their hands using water from a plastic jug, then supervised as they ate their meager meal. The care with which he attended to them wasn't that of a brother but of a parent. Checking if they were comfortable, making sure they drank enough water, wiping the smallest child's mouth with the corner of his sleeve. When one of the younger children offered him a bite of sandwich, the boy shook his head with a smile, saying something that Keanu couldn't hear but which made the little ones laugh. He was lying about having already eaten, Keanu realized. He was hungry but choosing to go without. After the younger children had finished eating, the older boy took out a worn paperback book. By the light of the lantern, he began reading to them, his finger tracing under the words as he went. The smaller children nestled against him, their eyes heavy with approaching sleep despite the early evening hour. This wasn't an occasional arrangement. This was their daily ritual. Keanu felt a burning sensation behind his eyes. The scene before him represented both tragedy and triumph, the devastating circumstances these children faced and the extraordinary resilience with which they confronted them. No child should have to bear such responsibility, yet here was a boy not much older than 10 acting as provider, protector, and parent to even younger siblings. As Keanu watched the makeshift family, 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Where were their parents? Did anyone from social services know about them? How long had they been surviving like this? And most urgently, how had such young children become invisible in a city of millions? The older boy tucked the younger ones onto the mattress, covering them with a collection of old jackets and blankets. Only when they had fallen asleep did he finally allow himself to eat. A few crackers and the last sip of water, consumed slowly as if to make them last longer. Then he sat by the lantern, counting the day's earnings again, his expression tightening as he divided the money into small piles with obvious purpose. Food, water, savings. The child's face in that moment revealed everything. Exhaustion beyond his years, worry that never fully receded, and a determination that refused surrender. He wasn't just surviving. He was fighting to create some semblance of normality for the younger children who depended on him. Keanu backed away from the window, his chest tight with emotion. He had seen suffering before, had donated to countless charities addressing homelessness and child welfare. But abstract knowledge of social problems felt vastly different from witnessing this intimate portrait of childhood survival. These weren't statistics or nameless faces on donation pamphlets. These were 3 specific children with unique stories, dreams, and burdens. Children who had adapted to circumstances that would break many adults. Walking away from the building into the night, Keanu knew with absolute certainty that he had crossed a threshold. Having seen what he had seen, he could not return to his previous life unchanged. These children had been surviving in the shadows of a city where he had walked freely, their struggle invisible until chance or fate had drawn his attention to them. Now that he had seen them, truly seen them, there was no looking away. Back in his apartment, Keanu paced restlessly. The contrast between his comfortable surroundings and the condemned building where 3 children huddled for warmth couldn't have been starker. His kitchen contained more food than those children might see in a month. His closet held more clothes than they had ever owned. The very walls that sheltered him represented a security they had learned to live without. He tried to distract himself with a script that needed reviewing, but the words blurred before his eyes, replaced by images of the boys' careful rationing of food, the younger children's trust in their brother, the weight of responsibility carried on such young shoulders. Every mundane object in his home now seemed to mock him with its abundance. Running water, electricity, a refrigerator full of food he hadn't thought twice about purchasing. At 2 in the morning, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, notebook open before him. He had begun writing down everything he knew about the children's situation, everything he had observed. The list was simultaneously detailed and inadequate. He could describe the external circumstances but knew nothing of their history, their names, how they had come to be alone. Keanu had always considered himself socially conscious. He donated substantial portions of his income to various causes, had founded charitable initiatives, showed up at benefit events. Yet tonight, those efforts seemed hollow. Distant actions that might help in abstract ways but failed to address the immediate reality of 3 specific children sleeping on a mattress in a condemned building less than 5 miles from where he sat. The usual solutions felt insufficient. Calling social services might separate the siblings. A one-time donation would provide temporary relief at best. Simply giving them money without understanding their full situation might create new problems rather than solving existing ones. What these children needed wasn't just resources but stability. Not just a meal but regular meals, not just shelter but a home, not just survival but the chance to actually be children. The older boy shouldn't have to parent his siblings. He should be playing, learning, sleeping without the weight of responsibility crushing his childhood. By dawn, Keanu had made a decision. He wouldn't approach this as a celebrity making a charitable gesture, nor would he simply delegate the problem to social services and consider his duty done. These children deserved more than bureaucratic processing. They deserved someone who saw them as individuals worthy of personalized care. He would need to proceed carefully. Building trust would take time. Understanding their specific circumstances would require patience. Creating lasting change in their lives would demand resources beyond just money. It would require connections, persistence, and careful navigation of systems designed to help but often burdened by overwhelming need. As sunlight began filtering through his windows, Keanu finally closed his notebook. He hadn't slept, but his mind had never been clearer. Today would not be like other days. Today would be the beginning of something that mattered more than any film or public appearance or industry event. For the first time in years, Keanu called his assistant to clear his schedule. "Family emergency," he explained simply. In a way, it wasn't even a lie. The next morning, Keanu returned to the condemned building, carrying a backpack filled with essentials. Food that wouldn't spoil, bottled water, new socks, a first aid kit. He approached cautiously, aware that direct intervention without establishing trust might frighten the children or drive them deeper into hiding. He stationed himself across the street, watching as the older boy emerged from the building around 8 in the morning. The child looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow, his face showing the strain of responsibilities no child should bear. He spoke briefly to the younger ones at the door, clearly giving instructions before departing on his daily mission to secure whatever resources he could find. Keanu waited until the boy was halfway down the block before approaching him. He kept his distance, walking parallel rather than directly toward him, trying to appear non-threatening. "Good morning," Keanu said simply when they were within speaking distance. The boy stopped immediately, his body tensing with wariness. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not of Keanu as a celebrity, but as a potential threat, an adult showing interest in a child who had learned to be invisible. "I'm not going to hurt you," Keanu said, staying where he was. "My name is Keanu. I noticed you yesterday." The boy's eyes darted around, clearly calculating escape routes, measuring Keanu's intentions. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said finally, his voice stronger than Keanu had expected. "I know that," Keanu replied gently. "I just wanted to talk. Maybe help if you'll let me." Suspicion hardened the boy's features. "We don't need help. We're fine." "You're taking care of your brother and sister," Keanu observed, not as a question. "That's a big job." Surprise registered on the child's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "How do you know about them?" "I followed you yesterday," Keanu admitted, deciding honesty was essential. "I saw you reading to them. You're doing an amazing job looking after them." The boy studied Keanu's face, searching for deception. "Are you from social services? Because we're not going to different foster homes. I promised my mom we'd stay together." "I'm not from social services," Keanu assured him. "I'm just someone who wants to help." No strings attached. Silence stretched between them. Around them, the neighborhood was coming to life. People heading to jobs, shops opening, the rhythm of urban existence continuing unaware of this pivotal conversation. "I'm Michael," the boy finally said. "I'm 12. He looked younger, his growth likely stunted by malnutrition and hardship. "How long have you been taking care of your siblings, Michael?" Keanu asked. Michael's shoulders slumped slightly. "Since Mom got sick. Almost a year now." Over the next hour, sitting on a bench in a small neighborhood park, Michael's story emerged in fragments. His mother, a single parent working 2 jobs, had been diagnosed with advanced cancer. With no family to help and minimal insurance, their lives had quickly unraveled. Hospital bills consumed their savings. Unable to work, she lost her job, then their apartment. "We stayed with her friend for a while," Michael explained, "but there wasn't room for all of us. Then we stayed in shelters, but they wanted to split us up. Boys in one place, girls in another. Mom made me promise we'd stay together." His mother had died 4 months ago. The children had briefly entered the foster system but fled when placement threatened to separate them. Using knowledge gained from months of housing insecurity with their mother, Michael had found the abandoned building and established their makeshift home. "Emma's 7, he said, speaking of his sister. "Tyler's just 5. He still cries for Mom sometimes, but I tell him stories about her so he won't forget." Despite his youth, Michael had developed sophisticated survival strategies. He knew which restaurants threw away edible food, which church programs offered meals without requiring identification, which public bathrooms were safe to use, which security guards would look the other way if they spotted the children. "The hardest part is school," Michael admitted. "Emma and Tyler should be learning stuff. I try to teach them from books, but I don't always know how to explain things." Keanu listened, asking gentle questions, never pressing when Michael hesitated. The boy's resilience was extraordinary, but beneath the practiced survival skills was still a child, one who should be riding bikes and playing video games instead of foraging for food and managing his siblings' nightmares. "What about you, Michael?" Keanu asked. "What do you want?" The question seemed to confuse the boy. "What do you mean? If you could have anything, what would you want for yourself?" Michael looked down at his worn sneakers. "I just want us to be together. And safe. And maybe—" He paused, as if the next wish might be too extravagant. "Maybe go back to school someday." Such modest dreams for a child who had shouldered adult burdens. No fantasies of video games or toys or vacations. Just safety, family, and education. The simplicity of these desires made Keanu's chest ache. "Michael," Keanu said carefully, "I'd like to help make that happen. All of it. But I need you to trust me, even a little." The boy studied him, weighing unknown dangers against the grinding hardship of their current existence. "Can I meet Emma and Tyler?" Keanu asked. After a long moment, Michael nodded. "But if they get scared, you leave." "Promise." "I promise," Keanu said. And with that simple agreement, the first foundation of trust was laid. That afternoon, Keanu followed Michael back to the condemned building with a backpack full of supplies. The boy had insisted on carrying it himself, maintaining his role as provider even as he accepted help. At the familiar pattern of knocks, Emma opened the door, a small girl with untamed curls and eyes too serious for her age. Behind her, half hidden, stood Tyler, thumb in mouth, studying the stranger with cautious curiosity. "This is Mr. Keanu," Michael explained to his siblings. "He brought us some food." The children's reaction to simple provisions revealed the depth of their deprivation. Emma gasped at the sight of fresh fruit, handling an apple as if it were made of precious crystal. Tyler's eyes widened at the peanut butter and bread, foods that had once been ordinary staples now transformed into luxuries. They didn't grab or rush, instead waiting for Michael's nod of permission before accepting anything. Keanu sat on the floor at their level, helping unpack the supplies, non-perishable foods, clean blankets, new clothes in their sizes, children's books, and a solar-powered lantern. For each item, he explained its purpose simply, never highlighting the children's need or making them feel like objects of pity. He spoke to them as people deserving of dignity, not as charity cases. As the initial wariness faded, the children's true personalities emerged. Emma, thoughtful and observant, asked practical questions about how to use the water filter Keanu had brought. Tyler gradually moved closer until he was beside Keanu, examining his watch with curious fingers. Michael remained vigilant, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly as he watched his siblings engage with their visitor. "I brought something else," Keanu said, reaching into his pocket. He produced 3 prepaid phones, already charged and programmed. "These are so we can talk to each other. My number is already saved in each one." Michael accepted his phone with solemn understanding of its significance. This wasn't just a device, it was a lifeline, an acknowledgement that they wouldn't be forgotten once Keanu walked away. Emma carefully placed hers in the zippered pocket of her tattered backpack, while Tyler clutched his with both hands, marveling at the glowing screen. "If you need anything at all, you call me," Keanu said, looking directly at Michael. "Day or night. It doesn't matter what time." As Keanu prepared to leave, promising to return the next day, Tyler suddenly rushed forward and wrapped his small arms around Keanu's legs. The unexpected embrace, this pure expression of trust from a child who had learned early that the world was unreliable, brought a lump to Keanu's throat. He knelt down, returning the hug with gentle care. "Thank you for helping my brother," Tyler whispered, his first word since Keanu's arrival. "He gets really tired sometimes." In that moment, surrounded by the makeshift home these children had created from nothing, Keanu knew that temporary assistance wasn't enough. These children deserved more than survival. They deserved the chance to thrive. Over the next weeks, Keanu worked tirelessly behind the scenes, leveraging resources and connections that few others could access. He consulted with child welfare attorneys to understand legal options that would keep the siblings together. He met with social workers who specialized in trauma-informed care for children who had experienced homelessness. He researched schools with support systems for students who had gaps in their education. The complexity of the system was daunting. Each step forward seemed to reveal new obstacles: paperwork requirements, waiting periods, jurisdictional issues. But Keanu approached each challenge with the same focus he brought to his most demanding roles, immersing himself completely in understanding the intricacies of family court, guardianship laws, and children's services. Throughout this process, Keanu visited the children daily, bringing necessities but also building relationship. He learned that Michael loved science and once dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Emma had a natural talent for mathematics and could calculate complex sums in her head. Tyler was fascinated by construction vehicles and could identify every type of crane and bulldozer. These weren't just homeless children, they were individuals with distinct personalities, interests, and potential that deserved nurturing. Each visit reinforced Keanu's determination to create not just a solution, but the right solution. After 3 weeks of intensive work, things began falling into place. Keanu purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood with good schools. He arranged for the property to be held in trust for the children's future education, while establishing legal guardianship with a carefully selected couple. Former educators with experience fostering traumatized children, who understood the unique bond between these siblings and committed to preserving it. Rather than simply donating money, Keanu created a comprehensive support system. He established connections with therapists specializing in childhood trauma. He arranged tutoring to help the children catch up academically. He set up a trust fund that would provide for their basic needs and education through college, structured to encourage independence rather than dependence. Most importantly, he ensured the solution addressed the children's emotional needs, not just their physical ones. The guardians understood that Michael needed to gradually release his parental role, that Emma required patience as she learned to trust adults again, that Tyler needed extra reassurance about permanence and stability. Throughout this process, Keanu remained directly involved but deliberately kept his celebrity status in the background. This wasn't about publicity or recognition. It was about 3 children who deserved a chance at childhood, at life, without the burden of adult responsibilities or the shadow of poverty defining their futures. When everything was finally arranged, Keanu met with Michael alone, explaining the plan in detail, answering his questions, addressing his concerns. The boy listened with the intense focus that had kept his family alive through impossible circumstances. "Why are you doing all this?" Michael finally asked, the question that had clearly troubled him from the beginning. Keanu considered his answer carefully. "Because you matter," he said simply. "You and Emma and Tyler. Not just what happens to you today or tomorrow, but what happens in all your tomorrows." Michael nodded slowly, processing this. "And we'll stay together? You promise?" "I promise," Keanu replied. "Always together." The day arrived to show the children their new home. Keanu picked them up early in the morning, their few belongings packed in new backpacks he had brought the previous week. Michael maintained his protective stance, walking slightly ahead of his siblings as they approached the car. Emma held Tyler's hand tightly, whispering reassurances when his steps faltered with uncertainty. "Where are we going?" Michael asked as they drove through neighborhoods increasingly different from the one they had known. Streets with trees lining the sidewalks, houses with front yards, children riding bicycles without constant vigilance. "You'll see," Keanu answered with a gentle smile. "Just a few more minutes." They turned onto a quiet residential street where modest homes sat comfortably spaced from one another. Halfway down the block, Keanu pulled into the driveway of a single-story house with blue shutters and a small front porch. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, and flowering plants bordered the walkway to the front door. "Here we are," Keanu said simply, watching in the rearview mirror as 3 pairs of eyes widened with confusion. Michael was the first to speak, his voice careful, controlled, as if afraid to misunderstand. "What is this place?" "This is your new home," Keanu explained, turning to face them fully. "The one I told you about. Where you'll all stay together, go to school, and be safe." For a moment, no one moved. The children seemed frozen, unable to process the reality before them. Then Tyler's small voice broke the silence. "We get to live in a real house?" "Yes," Keanu nodded. "A real house. With your own rooms, a backyard, everything you need." Emma's hands trembled as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Is it just pretend? Just for today?" The question revealed volumes about the disappointments these children had endured. Promises made and broken, hope offered and withdrawn. Keanu reached back to gently take her hand. "It's not pretend," he assured her. "This is real. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." As they approached the front door, it opened to reveal Sarah and David, the couple Keanu had selected as guardians after weeks of careful consideration. Both former teachers with experience fostering children from difficult backgrounds, they understood the delicate balance needed, providing structure and safety while honoring the deep bonds these siblings had formed through shared hardship. "Welcome home," Sarah said warmly, stepping aside to let them enter rather than approaching too quickly. David stood slightly behind her, his presence steady but non-threatening. Both had been carefully prepared for this moment, understanding that trust would come slowly and must be earned. Inside, the house revealed itself as thoughtfully prepared for 3 children who had known only deprivation. The living room had comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with age-appropriate books, and a table where they could eat meals together. The kitchen was stocked with food, real, nutritious food, not just enough to survive but enough to grow healthy and strong. But it was the bedrooms that finally broke through the children's careful reserve. They had been designed with each child's emerging personality in mind. Michael's room had a desk with science books, star charts on the walls, and a terrarium waiting for inhabitants. Emma's space featured a reading nook with mathematical puzzles and art supplies. Tyler's room contained building blocks, toy construction vehicles, and walls painted to resemble a cityscape. Tyler was the first to fully embrace the moment, running toward his room with a squeal of delight that sounded, for the first time, like the reaction of a normal 5-year-old boy. Emma followed more cautiously, her fingers trailing over the colorful comforter on her bed as if afraid it might dissolve at her touch. Michael stood in the doorway of his room, unmoving. Keanu waited beside him, respecting his silence. "This is all for us?" Michael finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "All for you," Keanu confirmed. "But why? You don't even know us." Keanu considered his answer carefully. "Because every child deserves this. A safe place to sleep, food to eat, the chance to learn and grow, the right to stay with their family." He paused, meeting Michael's eyes directly. "And because I saw you, Michael. Really saw you. What you've done for Emma and Tyler. It's extraordinary. But you deserve the chance to be a kid too." The careful composure that had carried Michael through months of impossible responsibility finally cracked. His shoulders began to shake, and tears he had never allowed himself to shed now flowed freely. Keanu knelt beside him, offering his presence without forcing an embrace. "It's okay to let go a little now," he said softly. "You don't have to be the grown-up anymore. You can just be Michael." From the other rooms came the sounds of Emma and Tyler exploring their new reality. Dresser drawers opening, excited exclamations, the bounce of a mattress being tested. Normal childhood sounds that had been absent from their lives for too long. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by his tears but unable to stop them. What if I don't know how to just be a kid? You'll remember, Keanu assured him. And when you don't, that's okay too. This isn't about forgetting what you've been through. It's about having the chance to build something new. As the day progressed, the children gradually relaxed into their new surroundings. They shared a meal at an actual table, had hot showers with plenty of water, explored a backyard that offered space to run and play. Sarah and David maintained a gentle presence, available but not intrusive, allowing the children to set the pace of connection. By evening, a remarkable transformation had begun. Tyler fell asleep surrounded by stuffed animals he had carefully arranged. Emma read quietly in her new bed, the lamplight soft against her face. And Michael, for the first time in nearly a year, allowed someone else to check on his siblings at bedtime, tentatively accepting that he could share the weight he had carried alone for so long. Months later, Keanu sat in the backyard of the blue-shuttered house, watching as Michael demonstrated a science experiment to his siblings. The boy still maintained his protective instincts, but they had softened into the natural care of an older brother rather than the desperate vigilance of a child forced to be parent. He attended school now, was slowly making friends, and had recently joined a science club where his natural intelligence flourished. Emma had discovered a talent for programming through a school STEM program and spent hours creating simple games for Tyler to play. The shadows beneath her eyes had disappeared, replaced by the healthy glow of regular meals and peaceful sleep. She still kept a small emergency backpack in her closet. Old habits died hard, but rarely checked it anymore. Tyler, having known stability for the longest percentage of his short life, had adapted most completely. He chattered constantly, built elaborate structures with his blocks, and had recently started asking Keanu to push him higher on the backyard swing set. The thumb-sucking had stopped, replaced by confident declarations about his future as a builder of the biggest buildings ever. Sarah and David had proven themselves worthy of the trust placed in them, providing structure without rigidity, comfort without smothering. They understood that healing happened in increments, not all at once, and celebrated each small victory. The first night without nightmares, the first genuine laugh, the first time any of the children asked for help instead of struggling alone. As for Keanu, he remained present in their lives, not as a savior or celebrity, but as a steady connection. He attended school performances, celebrated birthdays, and sometimes simply sat in comfortable silence with Michael when the boy needed space to process his complex emotions about their changed circumstances. What had begun as a chance encounter on a city street had expanded into something profound. A reminder that truly seeing those who exist in the margins of society, carried with it both responsibility and opportunity. These children, once invisible to a world rushing past, now had the chance to become visible on their own terms, to define themselves beyond their circumstances. As Keanu prepared to leave that evening, Michael walked him to his car. The boy had grown taller in recent months, his frame filling out with proper nutrition, his posture gradually straightening as the weight of responsibility shifted to appropriate shoulders. "You know what I figured out?" Michael said suddenly, his voice carrying a new confidence. "What's that?" Keanu asked. "You could have just given us stuff, food and money and things. That would have been easier," Michael observed with surprising insight. "But instead, you gave us a future." Keanu placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, struck by the wisdom in his words. "Sometimes the things people need most can't be put in a backpack." Michael nodded, understanding beyond his years. "Thank you for seeing us when nobody else did." As Keanu drove away, he reflected on the power of truly seeing those who have been rendered invisible by circumstance or society's indifference. The greatest transformations often began with the simplest act, the decision to look beyond the surface, to recognize the humanity in every individual, regardless of their circumstances. For 3 children who had once huddled in a condemned building, unseen and forgotten, that recognition had changed everything. And for Keanu himself, it had been a powerful reminder that the most meaningful actions weren't always the grandest or most public, but those that restored dignity and possibility to lives where both had been in short supply. In a world that often celebrated visibility for its own sake, he had discovered that seeing others, truly seeing them, was both a privilege and a responsibility. And in accepting that responsibility, both the seen and the seer could be transformed.